Welcome to Chapter 2 video presentation. Chapter 2 is titled Placing Procurements into Generic Categories. Just like all video presentation in this course, it's based on a book by Quintin Fleming, and the book is titled Project Procurement Management, Contracting, Subcontracting, Teaming. This chapter has the following two main learning objectives. First of all, this chapter will explain why it makes sense to place procurements into generic categories. Also, the chapter will discuss some of the defining characteristics of each of the type of procurement categories that is discussed throughout the chapter. And also, the chapter will provide some examples of procurements falling into those generic categories that chapter 2 is centered upon. So, why do we need to consider procurement categories? In other words, why do we need to place procurements into different categories? Why do we need to classify them? Well, the answer is simple. Procurements are different. Some procurements, meaning some buying arrangements, are unique, others are simple and routine. For example, if you as a company trying to purchase a new complex piece of software designed specifically for your organization, then this is something that is complex, meaning the software can be quite complex in terms of features and the lines of code and the complexity of those lines of code, and also unique, meaning this software, this type of application, this type of software has never been created before. Okay, but others are simple and routine. For example, if you're buying, let's say, cartridges for your printers, for your office printers, then it's something that is fairly routine. You're probably doing it on a monthly or annual basis, and simple. You don't have to really tell the vendor any kind of unique requirements about those cartridges. You just tell them the model type, and that's all you need. So some procurements are simple and routine. Some procurements are high risk while others are low risk. For example, if you're commissioning somebody, a construction management company, to create a high-rise for you, then there's a lot of risk involved. All those grandiose construction projects, in the Middle East, when they're trying to build like the highest skyscraper in the world, or the biggest shopping mall in the world by area, I mean, they always have a lot of delays, and there are always technical problems that need to be resolved because those are very highly complex projects, and the more complex a system is, the more risk is involved. In other words, the bigger, the more complex an asset is, the higher the chances that something can go wrong. But some procurements are low risk. For example, if you're buying, let's say, billions dollars worth of oil. Now, this is not a trivial procurement. In other words, it's a big purchase, but at the same time, the risk is fairly low. I mean, there are very low chances that something will go wrong with this oil delivery, because the nature of the procurement is just not that complicated, and therefore the chances that something will go wrong are not that high. Some procurements require long-term commitment from both buyers and sellers. Again, if you're developing a very complex piece of machinery or a very sophisticated enterprise-grade piece of software, then there should be a long-term commitment on both the buyer and seller side, because that kind of software, that kind of machinery has to be developed over many years. So during the duration of the development of the production, if we're talking about a physical asset, both parties need to be willing to cooperate and invest the necessary resources. Now, some procurements, they don't require long-term commitment. They can be simply bought in the market. For example, if you buy an airliner such as Boeing from Boeing, or any other manufacturer like Bombardier in Canada, or Airbus in Europe, then again, it's not a trivial purchase, because those new passenger jets, they cost probably tens of millions of dollars. But at the same time, it may not be a long-term commitment. In other words, you'll just you'll buy it at a particular date, and there's no need to have like a long-term cooperation, unless of course there's also a contract for servicing this. Then it can become also complex and long-term. So since all procurements are different, they should be managed differently depending on their size, complexity, uniqueness, risk level, and many other considerations. So this is the answer to the first question, or an explanation of the first learning objective. The reason we need to consider generic procurement categories is that placing procurements into those categories help us better to understand the nature of those procurements, and also manage them better, based on their unique characteristics. So let's take a look at the three generic procurement categories. In this chapter, we will discuss three generic procurement categories, meaning three common, frequently encountered categories of procurement, and some special procurement-like relationships. So strictly speaking, those two special procurement relationships, they may not really be classified as procurement, but they're close because they involve some kind of cooperation with another organization or another unit within the same organization. So let's talk briefly about the three generic procurement categories. The first category are major complexity procurements, and those procurements are done to the buyer specification. So this is how it works. Let's say there's a buyer, there's an organization that needs something complex. Let's say a complex piece of enterprise software that automates, let's say, pretty much everything that the organization does. So something along the lines of an ERP, but it's custom. It's unique. It hasn't been done before. So based on those buyer specifications, the seller will develop a solution or a product. So those are called major complexity procurements because the complexity in those kind of procurement arrangements is very high. Then you have minor complexity procurements, and those procurements are really done based on seller specifications. It's typically something related to buying something that is already out there in the market. So in other words, a buyer will not commission the seller, the vendor, let's say a software vendor, to create something unique. It's that it's something different. In other words, the seller or the vendor already has all kinds of software products with predefined specifications, and the buyer will just simply decide which product fits their own unique specifications, right? The organizational specifications. But the seller may or may not be willing to change the specifications. In other words, they're just selling something that already exists, something that already was built by the seller. Now, since nothing, not nothing, but since most of the tasks have been already accomplished on the seller side, right? Not too many things need to be customized. Those are called minor complexity procurements. They can still be complex because it may be complex for an organization to figure out what exactly they need from the vendor, and there may be some degree of customization, or there will always be like installation of the ready-made solution that may require some flexibility, some modifications on the buyer or seller side, but nevertheless they're not as complex as creating something new, complex, and unique from scratch, and that's why they're called minor complexity procurements. And then you have the third common category, routine buys of commercial off-the-shelf items or services. It's something that is even simpler than number two. So one example of routine buys of commercial off-the-shelf items would be something like buying a software package, let's say Microsoft Office. There's not that much of customization. Maybe there's no customization at all. It's already out there. It's on the shelf. Everybody knows what it is. So the seller, sets a particular price, the buyer negotiates the price, and that's about it. So this type of arrangement is even less complex than number two, where it's a big enterprise system that may require a unique approach or some customization. Here it's just commercial, off-the-shelf, ready-made, nothing needs to be customized. And then in addition to those three, there are two special procurement relationships. The first one is called procurements performed under strategic company teaming arrangements. So the way it works is that two organizations work together, and one organization could be like this main partner, and then they will subcontract to do something from another organization. But this relationship is more like a partnership rather than contracting. In other words, they agree to work together for mutual benefit. One example that comes to my mind is that speaking about construction projects, there's this huge building in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. It's called Burj Khalifa. Khalifa is the name of the ruler of the UAE, and Burj means tower in Arabic, right? It's the tallest man-made structure in the world. Maybe not man-made structure, but the tallest skyscraper in the world for sure. And during this construction project, Emaar, which is a big, semi-government-owned Dubai real estate company or construction company, they do everything related to real estate. So during the construction, they teamed up with Armani, which is a well-known fashion house from Italy. Armani was the last name of the Italian designer who established this, this brand. So they teamed up with Armani to create a hotel where Armani was a partner of Emaar, and they did like all the interior designs. They made furniture, like all the textiles were selected by them, and then eventually the hotel was named Armani Hotel. So it's also run by Armani company. So it's like a partnership. So two organizations work together, but it's not that one organization says, okay, you do this, I'll pay you. They're cooperating. They're cooperating on a mutually beneficial deal. And then there's a second special procurement relationship, interdivisional work involving procurements from other divisions of the company. So it's basically the same company trying to accomplish something, and they ask two different divisions to collaborate. And it may sound like something that is kind of made up, like why do you want to put it into special category? I mean, don't employees within an organization cooperate anyway? Well, it can be quite complex if you're talking about large corporations. I mean, large corporations like 3M, they may have a lot of separate divisions that are under the umbrella of one single corporation, meaning the ownership is joined. But the way the companies are run is like really separate companies. I mean, and that's why, when they work together, they cannot treat each other as strangers. But at the same time, there may be some degree of contractual relationship between different divisions, and it's not going to be like a profit sharing situation. One division may have like a loss, and the other one may have a profit from this relationship. So it's like a hybrid, like a weaker form of contractual relationship when two divisions or two units from the same organization work together. So let's talk about major complexity procurements. What are some of the defining characteristics of major complexity procurements? Those type of procurements typically involve procurement of a new product or a special service that hasn't been produced or offered before. So it's something unique, something that hasn't been done or produced before. Those are the most challenging procurements for a project manager. I mean, it's hard to create unique things because you have to make a lot of mistakes, you have to do a lot of analysis. And because of this complexity, by nature, they represent high risk to the project technical specifications, quality, cost, and schedule, since they require something new, right? As Warren Buffett used to say, he used to say, Charlie Mungers, which is his partner, and I, we applaud brave pioneers, brave explorers, but we prefer to skip the ride. Indeed, it's always it's always exciting. It's always an honorable endeavor to do something new, but it's just sometimes too costly and too risky, and may have a lot of technical issues. This new project may have a lot of technical issues, something that will impact cost, quality, and schedule at the end. Now, major complexity procurements typically require that project manager provides clear, detailed descriptions of what's needed from the seller. But again, if you're doing something unique, if you're creating something from scratch, then on the one hand, you're obliged to provide those clear specifications. On the other hand, you may not have those clear specifications on your side because, again, you're doing something that hasn't been done before. Major complexity procurements often result a long-term relationship between a buyer and a seller. There will be a significant, those type of procurements require a significant investment of time and resources. And that's why it has to be a formal long-term relationship where there's a contract that says, okay, we agreed to work together until we get it done, or for the next 5 years or something like that. Because otherwise, if one party drops out, then there'll be a huge loss on both sides, not only on the side of the party that decided to quit the relationship, but also on the side of their partner. Sometimes development and capital expenditures are shared by the buyer and the seller. So it cannot be like a one-sided deal where a buyer says, okay, do something for us, and if we like what you did, we will buy it, right? It just doesn't work that way. In fact, even a milder form of this kind of contract where a buyer says, okay, we'll pay you, do this, then once you're done, let's say we pay you 50%, then you create this new product for us, and then once it's done, we'll pay the remaining 50%. Even this kind of deal may not be fair to the seller because the seller may have to invest a lot of time, a lot of money. There may be a lot of workarounds. In other words, there will be like additional expenditures on the seller side to get this product done, something that both parties did not think before the project was initiated. So there needs to be like some kind of agreement that, okay, if additional expenses arise, we need to share them somehow so that it's a fair deal for both parties. Now, given these long-term relationships, there is technical, financial, and emotional commitment on both sides, and also legal commitment where both parties legally agree to collaborate from a technical, financial standpoint. And naturally, once managers, once employees from both organizations spend effort working on the project, they become emotionally committed where even if things are not going well from a technical and financial standpoint, they still feel very reluctant to quit and abandon the project. Now, once this long-term formal relationship is set, further competition from potential sellers is excluded. So in other words, there is an understanding and there's also a legally binding agreement that says, okay, once we agree to work together, we agree not to work with other companies, competitors, right? Because we need to get this project done. It's a long-term project. It requires a long-term commitment of resources, and that's why we cannot just change partners at will. Sometimes a cross-departmental or inter-organizational team, like some kind of steering committee, may be established to manage these relationships with representatives from both organizations. So they provide the necessary control, they're overlooking the execution of the contract, and also provide assistance, right? They provide some additional information, or maybe try to find additional resources within their organizations in order for this inter-organizational project to be a success. So some examples of major complexity procurements: the outsourcing of the entire IT department. An organization may have very unique requirements for the kind of IT assets and IT services it needs. Also, it's something that is done for the long term, right? Giving the long term horizon. So that's why it's a major complexity, because a consulting company or outsourcing company that provides those IT services, it needs to create oftentimes a unique solution for the buyer, and it's a long-term solution, and it's a solution requiring a lot of investments. So that's why it's a major complexity procurement. The creation of a new software package, especially if we're talking about like a large enterprise level package, that's also something that is complex and unique. Designing and implementing a new network for the entire organization is also a unique, complex project, or developing a new, unique hardware component for the organization, maybe some kind of security solution or some kind of custom server that does the processing needed by the organization, can also be placed into the major complexity procurements category. Now, the second generic category are the so-called minor complexity procurements. So what are the defining characteristics of minor complexity procurements? Well, these procurements are for items which already exist in some form from the seller. So it's not something that is brand new, something that is absolutely unique. The procured products or services are defined by the seller's own specifications. In other words, the seller already has certain products, and the seller understands the specifications of these products. It's just a matter of buyer understanding which product fits their needs and whether any minor modifications need to be done. So the procured product, because it's something that already exists. So the product or service is already commercially available from the seller. Although such buys can be critical for a project, a particular type of generic hardware or software is critical for a project, they do not require the creation of something new. Okay, and because they don't require the creation of something new, they typically have lower risks and require less resources to acquire. So that's why those procurements are called minor complexity procurements, not major complexity procurements. Now, some other characteristics of minor complexity procurements. The procured products or services are typically bought with no or little modifications from the seller, right? So the specifications are already there, even if there are some modifications that are fairly minor. Often these items are bought as a result of a long-term relationship with the seller. So oftentimes an organization will have a contract, not a formal contract, but sometimes a relationship, let's say with a software vendor such as IBM, software hardware vendor such as IBM, and when they need something complex, let's say a new mainframe, something that already exists, they will just go ahead and buy it from IBM because they think that, well, we've been doing business with them for a long time. They might charge a little bit of a premium, but we believe that you cannot go wrong with IBM. We've been with them for several decades now, and it's a well-established company. So that's, when it comes to choosing, it's typically not a very complex situation. It's easy to choose, once you have a relationship with the vendor already. But still, some competition may exist, as the buyer may switch to an alternative seller if the seller offers a better price and quality while still meeting the requirements. So no matter how good IBM or Microsoft are, no matter how well established their organizations and products are, if somebody comes up with a better, cheaper, more reliable solution, then companies may switch as well. Now, still, although those are not major complexity procurements, buying something big and expensive, even if it already exists, may require some time. So early identification of these procurements is quite important for ensuring timely delivery and discounts, so that you get a good price and the asset, the product or service is delivered on time, so that you can comply with the overall project timeline. So what are some of the examples of minor complexity procurements? For example, the purchase of an existing but high value software. Let's say the purchase of SAP. SAP is a ready-made solution. It already exists. It will require some degree of modification, but that modification is not comparable to building something from scratch. Or the purchase of a mainframe computer. It's a big purchase, but in a way it's not very complex because those mainframe computers may already exist. Let's say a company like IBM may be already offering those solutions. There may be some minor tweaking to make this mainframe work on an organizational network with organizational data, but again, those modifications are quite minor in complexity relative to creating something from scratch, building a new supercomputer with a unique architecture. And then the third category of generic procurements are routine buys of commercial off-the-shelf items or purchase services. So what are some of the characteristics of those routine off-the-shelf buys? They involve procurements of low-cost, high-volume off-the-shelf products or services. Let's say buying a lot of physical paper for copiers in the office. The fundamental principles of purchasing are more important than managing contractual relationships. In other words, the nature of the relationship between a buyer and a seller is not very complex. The buyer says, I need paper. The seller says, okay, I have the following papers with the following characteristics. Those are the prices. Let me know which one you need. Then the buyer says, okay, give me a discount, if I buy a large volume. So those fundamentals of, bargaining, discounts, volumes, they're much more important than the contractual relationships, because those contractual relationships are not complicated typically. You deliver the paper and you get paid within 30 days, something like that. Those procurements that fall into this routine category, they typically involve commodities or interchangeable components. A commodity is something that is generic, something that doesn't have unique defining characteristics. Again, an example of a commodity will be something along the lines of oil. Now, there are some differences in oil being produced in different parts of the world. Like it may have less sulfur, more sulfur, but at the same time, it's oil, and any refinery can deal with that oil, right? So it's a commodity. The same thing. Another example of commodities like milk, water, bricks, and stuff like that. Something that doesn't have many points of differentiation. A brick is a brick. The quality can be slightly different, but bricks are not that different, right? So typically those kind of procurements are for something relatively simple, something that is a commodity. So some examples of routine buys of commercial off-the-shelf software items or services include packaged commercial software such as Microsoft Office. It's already there. You just negotiate based on the number of licenses that you need and based on the kind of functionality you want this package suite to offer. Routine IT services such as maintenance of copiers or user support, it's also something generic. You as a company, you will not get ahead of your competition if you have superior maintenance of copiers. It's important, but not that important. It's not strategic. And also buying some commodity hardware components such as desktop computers, printers, faxes. Nowadays, they're not that different. They're all good enough when it comes to simple desktop use by a rank and file user. So this is the third category of generic procurement types. So now let's talk about some of the special categories. Now the first one is strategic teaming arrangements. So what are some characteristics of strategic teaming arrangements? Typically, executives of two companies decide to combine their assets to work together on a new project. So it's not like, it's a bit different from a typical procurement relationship where one organization is a buyer and the other organization is a seller. Here you have two executives deciding to collaborate together. They're not, they don't have this kind of buyer-seller, relationship. But oftentimes these are very important high-value projects, and the very reason sometimes for two companies for two companies deciding to cooperate is that they feel like that individually they don't have enough resources for this kind of product or service. One example that comes to my mind is Airbus, manufacturer of airline jets, of passenger jets. Now, Airbus was actually a consortium of several countries, right? Because individual companies within individual European countries, they felt that alone they don't have the expertise, they don't have the financial resources to compete with Boeing because it was too big of a company, it was well entrenched financially in terms of technical know-how. So that's why they decided several countries, it was like Germany, France, and a bunch of other participants, they decided to pull together their expertise, their resources to create a competitor to Boeing, European competitor to Boeing. So if you have two companies, typically the work involves two components where each component is performed by a separate firm. I think if you're talking about airliners, we're talking about hundreds probably, or at least dozens of, well, it's actually probably thousands of components, right, produced by dozens or hundreds of different vendors. Sometimes the companies are two equal partners. Sometimes there is a subordination where you have a prime contractor and subcontractor. So one will be the main partner, the other company will be a minor partner. Also, early identification of such procurements is essential to prepare all the teaming arrangements. It's always difficult for two companies to cooperate because they have different goals, different processes, different policies. Personally, I've been on a lot of partnerships that sounded perfect in theory. It was like a match made in heaven. We need to cooperate. But when you actually start getting to all those little details about who will pay what, who is responsible for what, that's when things get ugly, and sometimes you just feel like, well, there's no way this partnership can work. Yeah, it sounds profitable for both parties, but it's not going to work. The companies are just too different, have different policies and different goals, and there is no way they're going to bend all of the rules to make it work. So sometimes you really need to have very powerful sponsors who will say, okay, on both sides, right? When both senior executives from two organizations will say, look, we don't care what the policies are, we'll bend the rules, we'll change the policies, but we will make this relationship work. If you don't have this kind of commitment from top management, I wouldn't even bother starting working on a partnership. So what are some of the examples of strategic teaming arrangements? A construction company partnering with other design, construction, and engineering companies to construct a building. And I gave you an example of Burj Khalifa. You can read about it in Wikipedia, where they partnered with a lot of companies. MR Properties partnered with a lot of companies. But one of the partnership I remember was with Armani to create a hotel within Burj Khalifa. Or IBM partnering with Microsoft to develop personal computers with an operating system DOS that could compete with other vendors of personal computers, such as Apple, which was the biggest threat to IBM's business at that time. There's a great movie on this topic that kind of shows you like how this partnership was created and why it turned out to be such a success for Microsoft. And the movie is called Pirates of the Silicon Valley. And you get the sense from this movie that IBM, they didn't view Microsoft, which was like a 5-person company based in a hotel somewhere in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They didn't view them like as a partner, obviously, because IBM was a giant and Microsoft was just nothing, was a small company. They didn't view them like as a client or anything like that. They basically said, look, we're going to partner with Microsoft to see what happens. Because IBM at that time, they didn't view desktop computers as their major market. They were specializing in servers and mainframes. So they thought to themselves, well, let's work with those young guys. And if they create something good, such as a good operating system for a desktop computer, then our machines will become more attractive to individual users. And that will keep Apple at bay. Or if this desktop computer market becomes something big, we can steal market share from Apple. So that was their reasoning. So they really viewed them as like some kind of minor experimental partner. And Microsoft really took advantage of the situation where IBM did not view them as a competitor. And they were quite willing to, because they didn't view desktop computers as a major market, they were willing to give Microsoft good terms. So Bill Gates negotiated that Microsoft retains copyright to DOS, to disk operating system, and then there will be like a small royalty for every computer, every IBM desktop computer shipped with DOS on it. And IBM did not see that much potential in that anyway. And they said, okay, yeah, let's do it. We agree on your terms. And then it turned out to be a very big market, and DOS paved the way for Microsoft Windows. And they stole a lot of, so to speak, a lot of people say that they stole a lot of innovations, especially in relation to visual interface from Apple Computer. And they started beating Apple Computer in terms of the market share, and it turned out to be like a very big win for Microsoft. Not as much for IBM, and for Apple it was really like the start of the decline of their company. Until later, like in, I think it was around late 1990s, where Apple kind of re-emerged with new products that became very popular in the marketplace. And then we have the second special arrangement, which is interdivisional work. Some of the characteristics of interdivisional work are as follows. At the heart of this arrangement is that it involves procurements or collaborations from other divisions of the same company. It may seem easy, low risk arrangement, but it's often not the case. I can attest to that. In my work, oftentimes there was I'll give you like a very specific example. We had our own housing available, right? And this housing, on campus, and this housing was idle. We couldn't, it wasn't occupied, so basically they were losing money. The housing department was losing money. So I decided to create an arrangement where some of our doctoral students can use this empty housing over weekend because they were all out of town. Not all, but a lot of them were out of town. So I wanted them to use for a discount, for a fraction of the cost. And I came to the head of the housing department and I explained how profitable it is to them. I said, look, you're getting nothing, you'll be getting something from this idle housing. Just give us a couple of rooms in the dormitory and stuff like that. And then they made it so complicated, they asked me to fill in a bunch of forms, they asked me to obtain all kinds of permissions from top management, and at the end they gave me the price, and the price was actually higher than the price of a hotel nearby, right? So that's how I quickly figured out it's much easier and cheaper for me to work with another organization, which is a hotel, than working within my own organization with another division. So some issues, again, it seems easy, but sometimes it's actually more complicated. Some issues that make those arrangements very complicated are political risks, the other division may view the project that you're proposing to them as some kind of turf invasion, something that will make them look bad or lose power. There are often difficulties with cost accounting. So who pays to whom? Who treats this expense as a cost and as a profit? So who is winning, who is losing financially? Sometimes it's hard to determine. So they would rather work with external buyers and sellers because it's easy to record those kind of transactions. Difficulties enforcing contracts. Again, when you're dealing with somebody on the outside of your organization, there's a contract, you can sue them. The contract can be relatively ambiguous, but if you're cooperating with somebody within your own organization based on goodwill, then there's no contract in a way, right? So how do you enforce the arrangement? How do you punish somebody for not delivering on the terms of your agreement, right? It's impossible to punish somebody who is a part of your organization and who is not really your subordinate in any way. And also difficulty sharing risks and rewards. Who takes credit, who becomes the owner of the newly created asset? Those things sometimes are very hard to determine within the same organization. So what would be an example of an interdivisional work? Let's say procurements of hardware or software components from other units or subcontracting them for IT services. So let's say you work for a big company such as Microsoft and you're developing a new product that may benefit, let's say, from one of the existing Microsoft solutions, let's say Microsoft Office, and you're trying to somehow subcontract this Microsoft Office division, so that they give you some of their algorithms, right? And then, or some of their code, or they somehow integrate their components with your product, and things may become ugly because this division may say, look, we don't want to give out our code to another division because we own it, we developed it, we don't have time for it, we don't have enough labor, so they need to hire somebody else. So this relationship can become very complicated, although it's within the same organization.